Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this first stakeholder meeting for the Yuma PM-10 Nonattainment Area Plan. We're hoping our Air Quality Division Director, Daniel Cheselinski, will be joining us in just a moment. He's having a little trouble with GoToWebinar, and we're just trying to give him a chance to get on. But if it takes too long, we'll just go ahead and get started.
By the same token, if any of you are having any technical difficulties, you should have a questions tab either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how you've joined the call. If you click on that tab, you can type in questions and we'll be able to hopefully help you out.
Oh, and I see Daniel is now on the participants list. Go ahead and Daniel, can you unmute your microphone and we'll go ahead and get the meeting started. Well, all right, well, I think we should probably go ahead and get started. I'm not sure what the situation was with Daniel, and we don't want to delay too long. So on Daniel's behalf, I guess I'll welcome everybody. My name's Steve Burr. Yeah, Daniel's saying he's in attendee mode only. Daniel, you should be able to unmute yourself. Oh, there we go. I'll make him a presenter. There we go. I didn't see. Daniel, I just made you a presenter. Can you join us now? Well, I thought I did.
You hear me now?
There we go. Yay. Fantastic. Sorry about that. Sorry we didn't get that worked out further ahead of time. All right. Well, did you want to do some introductions first, Daniel, and then we'll move ahead with the presentation?
Yeah. So welcome. I'm Daniel Cheselinski, the Air Quality Division Director. I appreciate you guys taking the time today to join us for the stakeholder meeting regarding the Yuma PM-10 non-attainment SIP. And let me turn it over to the team and have Steve introduce yourself and the rest of the team that's presenting.
Okay, well, my name is Steve Burr. I'm a senior executive consultant, and I am the primary planner for the Yuma PM-10 SIP. Adam, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, thanks. I'm Adam Ross. I'm the technical lead for ADEQ's PM10 planning effort in Yuma. Lexi, go ahead.
Hi all, I'm Lexi Ahmed. I am assisting with the planning and I'm also with ADEQ. Thanks.
Okay, so should we move ahead with the presentation?
Yes, I think that makes sense. Yes, please. I appreciate it. Okay. Sorry, still having technical difficulties.
Okay. And I just want to make sure, since I can't see what everybody else is seeing, that my presentation is up on the screen, visible to everybody.
It's
It is
not.
not.
You need to reshare after having made Daniel the presenter.
Oh, I see. Okay.
While you're doing that, just note, well, a couple of notes for the attendees. Thank you very much for joining us. If you have any questions or other feedback, please please click on the speech bubble with a question mark in it. And if you have something that would be easier to communicate verbally rather than in writing, just say so in that question, and we can unmute you on an individual basis at that time. And please note that this session is being recorded. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So just wanted to make sure that everybody had access to the written materials that we're going to be going over during this meeting. So I'm starting with the links to those materials on our website. We did share that with the email notifications that went out for the stakeholder meeting. But yeah, just as Adam said, you can ask to raise your hand if you would like to participate orally. You can submit questions in the question interface. And please feel free to do that at any point during the presentation. We've got a relatively small group, so I don't see any problem with having a little bit more of an interactive session here this afternoon. Let's see. Oh, I just wanted to note that probably obvious, but it could be that you'll ask a question that we can't answer right away or we can't answer in this meeting. And if that turns out to be the case, we will table that question and get back to you at the latest at the second stakeholder meeting on this particular draft rule. So I'm going to start with some background on the Yuma PM-10 non-attainment area, and before getting into walking through the provisions of the rule that we're talking about in this particular stakeholder group. So the problem that we're dealing with in Yuma, the air quality problem, is that it is a PM10 non-attainment area. So just to start with, PM10 is particulate matter, which, as the slide indicates, is finely divided liquid or solid material that can be suspended in the atmosphere and therefore can be breathed in and penetrate the respiratory tract. In particular, PM10 is particulate matter with an aerodynamic diameter of 10 microns or less. And the illustration to the right is one we use often. It gives you an idea of the size of particle that we're dealing with. So as you can see, PM10, the circumference of a PM10 particle is much smaller than the width of a human hair, obviously much, much smaller than beach sand, and therefore can be inhaled and can penetrate deep into the respiratory tract and cause health effects. I should mention that there is, of course, another regulated form of particulate matter, that is PM2.5, which, as you might guess, is 2.5 microns or less in aerodynamic diameter. And as you can see in the diagram, is much, much smaller even than PM10. And because of that, is generally regarded as the more dangerous of the two. But both are associated with some serious health effects. For example, PM10 can cause irritation of the eyes, nose, and throat, coughing, shortness of breath, fatigue, and if someone has existing respiratory symptoms, then being exposed to excessive amounts of PM10 can aggravate those symptoms, make them worse. So because of these health effects, we have EPA, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, has adopted standards to attempt to protect public health and welfare from those effects. So these are the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. They're set by EPA under the Clean Air Act, and they take two forms. So a primary standard protects public health, and the secondary standard protects public welfare. And for PM10, both are identical. EPA set the same standard as the primary and the secondary standard. And that standard is 150 micrograms per cubic meter of air. It's averaged over a 24-hour period. And we determine compliance with the standard by actually measuring the concentration in the ambient air. We have monitors stationed throughout the state, including in Yuma, that periodically sample and measure the load of PM10 that people are being exposed to. The standard is violated if there is more than one measured concentration above the standard. And you determine officially whether you're in compliance with the standard by taking a 3-year average of the number of, they're called exceedances. Again, these are just concentrations above the standard. If on average you have more than one exceedance per year over the 3-year period. So as I mentioned, Yuma PM10 is designated as a PM10, I'm sorry, Yuma is designated as a PM10 nonattainment area. This shows the map of the nonattainment area. That is the line. So I'm getting an inquiry as to whether we have any objection to sharing the presentation. Absolutely not. We will post the presentation to the website after it's done. The reason we hadn't done so previously is I tend to tinker with presentations right up until before I actually give them. So didn't want to do it prematurely, but we will post it after the meeting is over. So on the map, the Yuma PM-10 nonattainment area is shown with the light blue border. And a nonattainment area is simply an area that has been determined based on the monitoring data that I described earlier as not complying with the NAAQS. And then the Clean Air Act, the Federal Clean Air Act, imposes an obligation on the states to develop plans to remedy that, to bring the area back into compliance with the NAAQS. And we have been under an obligation to do that since 1991, which is when Yuma was first designated as a PM10 nonattainment area. We actually submitted nonattainment plans for Yuma back in 1992 and 1994. There was no EPA action on those plans. Then in 2006, EPA made what is known as a clean data determination. Oh, and I think I did not correct the information on this slide. Adam, I think you said that it's not 98 to 2000. It was a little later than that, 2004, like 2002 to 2004.
No, I don't think that's wrong.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The rulemaking issuing that determination may have mentioned other years of data, but it's entirely possible that that's the correct dates for what they formally based it on. I'm not sure.
All right. Well, in any case, during that period, and actually for the entire time up to that period and a little bit afterwards, Yuma actually did not violate the PM10 NAAQS. And so EPA made what's known as a clean data determination, finding that based on available monitoring data and the rolling 3-year averages, that Yuma was compliant with the NAAQS. And the consequence of that was that the state was relieved of its obligation to submit most non-attainment area plan requirements. There were still, when this happens, there's still a few requirements you have to meet, but most of your non-attainment planning obligations are suspended when you get a clean data determination. And then if you can get the area to be redesignated to attainment, which takes a number of steps. It's not sufficient just to get the monitoring data, but there's some other things you have to do. If you can get to that point, then the non-attainment area planning requirements go away entirely, and your obligation becomes maintaining compliance with the standard from that point. So that obviously was a very welcome development. Unfortunately, within a few years, Yuma actually started violating the PM-10 NAAQS. We had off and on stakeholder discussions about what to do about that. Ultimately, we're not able to move forward with any kind of mitigating measures. And in 2022, EPA officially rescinded its clean data determination. And that meant that we once again became subject to the obligation to submit a non-attainment area plan. And in fact, EPA issued an official SIP call and required the state to submit a SIP that would satisfy all non-attainment area requirements, and also imposed a new attainment deadline of December 31, 2027. So in a nutshell, that's our obligation right now. We are obligated to develop a state implementation plan that will achieve compliance with the NAAQS by the end of 2027. And these are basically the steps that we're going through, and this rulemaking is part of the SIP development process to meet Clean Air Act requirements for the Yuma PM-10 non-attainment area. One of our obligations is to impose reasonably available control measures on all of the economic sectors within Yuma that contribute significantly to PM10 concentrations. We also have to demonstrate that the measures that we adopt in the plan will be adequate to achieve attainment by the 2027 deadline. We have to make a demonstration of attainment, which involves running some air quality models, and that is something that Adam is primarily responsible for and has been working very hard on in our SIP development process. And then in addition to measures designed to achieve the NAAQS, we're obligated to adopt what are known as contingency measures. And these are control requirements that don't go into effect immediately. They only go into effect if we fail to meet one of the deadlines for the area. In this case, it would be the attainment deadline. If we fail to meet the attainment deadline by December 31, 2027, then we would have to have contingency measures that would automatically go into effect when EPA made the finding of failure to attain. So to develop this control strategy, we had to identify the sources of air pollution in the Yuma area that, again, substantially contribute to PM10 concentrations. Those are open areas, paved and unpaved roads, and those are the sectors that are addressed in this draft rule that we're discussing this afternoon. A second is construction, and then a third is agriculture. And we will be having separate stakeholder meetings and presenting separate draft rules for each of those other sectors. And one thing I'll note is that because there's some a little bit of overlap in, not in the coverage of the rules, they're entirely distinct, but in the types of requirements and controls that are imposed between construction and open areas and roads, we have a single definition section that applies to both of those rules. And that's why if you review the materials ahead of the meeting, you'll have found that we had first of all, the actual rule language for open areas and roads. And then we also had a definition section, but you might have noticed that it was both for open areas and roads and also for construction. So again, we're working to develop a control strategy that satisfies that RACM requirement and will bring the area back into attainment with the PM10 NAAQS. and will include the necessary contingency measures. But there's actually one other goal for our plan, and it has to do with this concept of exceptional events. So the Clean Air Act, specifically Clean Air Act Section 319, recognizes that there may be circumstances under which violations of the NAAQS are entirely unavoidable by the state. And the term that's used for that is exceptional event. And if the state can demonstrate that specific monitoring data that is above the NAAQS is attributable to an exceptional event, then that data will be excluded in determining whether the area is in compliance with the NAAQS. The criteria for making an exceptional event demonstration is that, first of all, obviously the event has to have affected air quality. It has to be not reasonably controllable, and I'll explain in a minute why I emphasize that language. And then it has to be the result of either human activity that is not likely to happen again, not likely to recur, or it has to be a natural event, so something that, because it's natural, human beings don't really have the ability to control it.
Steve, I'm sorry to interrupt. Certain attendees are saying that they lost your audio. I don't know whether that's an isolated issue. But I see that we have a raised hand. If you don't mind, Johnny, I'm going to unmute you momentarily. If you don't mind introducing yourself, if you're comfortable doing so, and then asking your question or providing your feedback. And if you wouldn't mind also letting us know whether you can hear Steve or not, that would be helpful. Thanks. You should be able to unmute now.
There we go. Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Have you been able to hear
You
Steve
can hear me?
for the past few minutes?
Okay. I've been able to hear him. It is kind of spotty though.
Oh,
but for the most part, it hasn't fully cut out.
Okay.
I think it's just a connection issue.
Yeah, I see from the questions.
And I'm Johnny. I'm the Air Program Manager.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I'm the Air Program Manager at MCAS Yuma. And when you had cut out for a bit, I wasn't sure if you're taking questions during the presentation or if you're wanting us to sort of whatever's best. I don't know if I missed any of those directions. But it came up in the presentation. I was just wanting to know. Okay, I just wanted to know if we're still essentially on track for that 2027 deadline, given how long this whole process has taken.
Yes, I was
or if there'll be an extension. Okay.
I was going to go into what our strategy is for 2027, basically. So in just a moment.
Okay. Okay.
And yes, again, questions, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm sorry if there were those of you who couldn't hear me at the time, but questions are welcome during the presentation. That's fine. Right. Well, I'm sorry, Pam's having difficulty with the audio.
We'll see if she can rejoin.
Okay. All right. Okay. So as I was saying, so one of the criteria for demonstrating an exceptional event is that it was not reasonably controllable. And then EPA rules provide that specifically for wind-blown dust, in order to satisfy that criterion, you have to demonstrate that you have a program of reasonable controls in place. And currently Yuma does not. We do not have rules that would satisfy the reasonable control requirements for getting exceptional events accepted by EPA. So another goal of this rulemaking is to do that, to get get sufficient controls in place that EPA will accept them as reasonable controls. And then in the future, the consequence will be, okay, I got a message from our colleague Zach that his suggestion was if you are having difficulty with the audio, if you can't hear at all, or if it's spotty, you could try calling in on your phone. Zach says he says I'm crystal clear on his phone, which is nice to hear. But getting back to it, we want to have reasonable controls in place in order to be able to demonstrate to EPA that, because this is true, some of the concentrations above the NAAQS and Yuma that we've experienced in the past, and we anticipate this will be the case in the future, are not within our control. They are due to high wind events. And if we can do both, if we can get an approvable plan into EPA and actually, bring concentrations that are within our control under the NAAQS and then have the ability to demonstrate exceptional events, we'll be able to get to our ultimate end goal, which is to get Yuma designated to an attainment area and to make these non-attainment area requirements. Well, some of them will remain in place, obviously, to continue to control emissions, but some will then become unnecessary. And there are other advantages to that redesignation to attainment under the Clean Air Act that we'd very much like to get for the Yuma area, as well as obviously the benefits of protecting public health from excessive concentrations of PM10. So let's see, sorry, Lee. All right, so this is addressing the question that Johnny brought up about, where we stand in terms of meeting the Clean Air Act deadlines, and in particular, this December 31, 2027 deadline for attainment. So as I mentioned, we have to have 3 years of data showing attainment in order to get EPA to find that the area has attained the NAAQS. That's so to get EPA to actually say, yeah, you've done it at the end of December 31, 2027, you've attained the NAAQS, you can move on to the next stage, which is trying to get redesignation. We would have to have clean data for 2025, 2026, and 2027. And that is not likely to happen. So, but that doesn't mean that we are necessarily going to get a finding of non-attainment after the end of 2027, because the Clean Air Act has a provision for obtaining up to 2 extension years to your attainment deadline. The requirement is basically that if in 2027 we have no more than 1 exceedance of the PM10 NAAQS in the Yuma area, then we will qualify for an additional year. It will be added to our attainment deadline. And then if in 2028 we achieve the same thing, we have no more than 1 exceedance, we get 1 more year, and then by 2029, assuming everything goes well, we will actually have the 3 years of data we know we need in order to get a finding of attainment from EPA. So that is what not ultimately, but that is in the near term what we're working for. That is one of the goals of this rule, in addition to getting the ability to get exceptional events approved. We'd like to get these rules in place and implemented in time to actually reduce emissions in 2027 sufficiently so that we can qualify for that first 1-year extension. And so our goal right now is to get the rules finished by summer of next year, and probably starting even before the rules are final, but definitely very much afterwards, to have a robust outreach program to the regulated sectors, making them aware of the rules, helping them to determine how they'll go about complying with them, in order to try to get actual emission reductions implemented in place by the beginning of 2027, so we can have, again, so we can have that clean year. So we were hoping to be a little farther along than that at this point. We've fallen a little bit behind of our original schedule, but right now it's looking like that should not be a problem. We should be able to get the rules in place by the summer of 2026. And see any questions about that. So, all right, so I'm going to turn to the rule overview and turn off sharing for a second and bring up the rule, and then go to the beginning. All right, can everybody see that okay?
You can see the whole Microsoft Word display. So
Yes,
display
that is what I am shooting for. Is I'm showing my Microsoft Word version of the rule language. All right, so what I'd like to do, pardon me?
Whatever else you have on that display is visible as well. Nothing else at the moment, but just so you're aware.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. Yeah, that's fine.
Making sure.
Okay, it's just easier generally. I was to do the full screen share. All right, so this is the draft rule that we have put together to make the control strategy that we've developed for open areas and roads enforceable, and to get it actually implemented in the Yuma area. And one thing I left out a slide, but I can just describe it to you. So the basic elements of any air quality rule are generally, first of all, you have a statement of applicability. So you try to make clear exactly what activities are subject to the rule, and also make clear what activities are not subject to the rule. And so we start the rule with this applicability section, and then we identify a number of exceptions to the rule's applicability. So, and then the other thing I wanted to mention is that, well, a couple things. First of all, there are these footnotes included in the document. Those will not be part of the rule when it is finally proposed to the Secretary of State and hopefully eventually adopted. Those are just for the benefit of reviewers to try to clarify some matters in the rule. And then, as is often the case with regulations, there are a lot of defined terms in this rule. There are a lot of words that include specific definitions, and to make it a little easier to see what those are, I have changed the font for those. So those are green and italics in the document. And then if you see something that's green and italics, you know you can find where it's defined in this definitions document. Go back to the beginning of that. Okay. All right. So first of all, the statement of applicability, we state that this rule applies to open areas. Those are basically vacant lots or other undeveloped land that has dirt that, if not adequately controlled or adequately stabilized, is the term used in the in the rule can result in the generation of fugitive dust, particularly in the presence of wind, but also, for example, if there's traffic over it. So then we also cover unpaved traffic areas, which are generally parking lots, equipment staging areas, that kind of thing, but again, undeveloped land, but in this case where the intended use is some use of vehicles on the land. And so that requires a different form of control than just a normal open area. We also cover track out from open areas and unpaved traffic areas. So track out is what occurs when mud or dirt adheres to a vehicle that's passing through an area, and then it goes out onto a public roadway or a paved roadway, and because of vibrations, the dirt falls off onto the roadway, and then additional traffic over the dirt can re-entrain it into the atmosphere, and that can become a significant source of PM10 concentrations. We also cover unpaved roads and paved public roads. And I should mention that for each of these, we don't cover every type of, for example, open area or unpaved road. There are additional criteria for each of the standards, in each of the standards for applicability, mostly size limitations. If you're below a certain size, then you're not subject to the rule. And we'll get into that with each of the rule components. We mentioned that compliance with the standards is determined in accordance with subsection H. So that's another thing that's important in an air quality rule, is to specify exactly how you determine. When you say what a standard is, you also need to specify how you go about determining whether somebody is in compliance with the standard. And then we have record keeping requirements in subsection I. And then consistent with state law, when this rule is, the final version of this rule is filed with the Secretary of State, it will become effective 60 days afterwards. All right, so we do have some exemptions. So these exemptions apply to all of these types of activities that are subject to the rule. Open area, paved road, whatever, unpaved road, whatever it is, these exceptions apply. So first of all, to make it clear that we have or to try to make a clear division between the activities that are subject to the three different types of rules or three different sets of rules that we're adopting, we state in this rule that activities at a construction site that are subject to the rule that we're still working on for construction sites, those are not subject to the requirements in the open area rules. And then the same thing for farm activities that are subject to existing rule 613.01, which we will also be revising as part of the control strategy and rulemaking process for this SIP. So if you're operating a construction site, operating a farm, you are subject to these rules. You are not subject to this rule. In addition, we propose to exempt initial landscapes, or the use of mechanized equipment to establish landscapes, maintain landscapes, and also playing on or maintaining a field used for non-motorized sports. We also exempt emergency activities conducted by a utility or government agency, and then various sorts of military training activities that are laid out in this section. So no questions on that? Okay. All right, so the first actual standards in the rule are for open areas, and I said, we have individual applicability thresholds for each of the sectors that are covered by these rules. So for open areas, we have two different types of thresholds. First of all, The rule only applies if you have at least 1,000 total square feet of disturbed surface area on your in your open area. And you can look, that's one of our defined terms, so you can look that up over here. A disturbed surface area is any portion of the Earth's surface or material placed on the Earth's surface that has been physically moved, uncovered, destabilized, or otherwise modified from its undisturbed natural conditions. So you have to have, so if you have an open area, it's not developed, but it's also not disturbed, then that portion of the open area at least is not subject to the rule, and you're only subject to the rule if the disturbed portion of the area is greater than 1,000 total square feet. And then the rule also only applies if that disturbed area is in an urban area and is located on a lot or parcel of property that is greater than 0.1 acres in size. And then if it's in a rural area, the threshold is larger. It has to be located on a property that is greater than half an acre in size. And this subsection does not apply to unpaved traffic areas. So if you have an area that has the intended use of parking or maneuvering vehicles, staging equipment, that kind of thing, so it falls within the definition of an unpaved traffic area, then that is not subject to this rule. So we generally have two different types of standards in each of these rules. We generally have a limit on visible emissions from the regulated activity or area. And then we also generally have specific requirements regarding the control, specific control measures that you're expected to employ for those areas. And so in the case of open areas, the requirement is that you're not allowed to have visible emissions, so visible fugitive dust that's generated by activity in the area that crosses the property line. And as we'll see, we've specified a method for making that determination below in section H. We also have requirements for stabilizing the area. So that is basically to turn your what was the term again? Disturbed surface area into a stabilized surface area. That's how you go about meeting the rule. And we have a number of methods that you don't have to employ all of these. You select one. This is basically a menu of options. And there's a couple of other standards that work the same way, where you can choose which method works best for you. And these are all pretty standard. These, in fact, a lot of these rules came from rules from other areas, like Maricopa County in particular, that have problems with fugitive dust emissions and therefore violate the PM-10 NAAQS. They have rules of this kind. And so we adopted much of our rule language from those rules, tried to fit it to circumstances in Yuma. And this in particular is pretty standard. These methods for making sure that your disturbed surface area becomes stabilized in an open area. And there are methods specified in subsection H for making each of these determinations. I think it's important to note that it will not be, as if you're the owner of an open area, it won't be your obligation to conduct any of these tests. Some of them are fairly elaborate. I wouldn't want to have the responsibility, honestly, for implementing some of them myself. And that's not something we're imposing on the regulated party. These are methods that will be employed by an inspector. So if there's some kind of routine inspection or complaint, an inspector would come out, and depending on what you're trying to do to stabilize the area, they would employ methods designed to determine whether you satisfy these standards and you're in compliance with the rule. But again, you're not under an obligation to do that at all, or on any sort of schedule. So another important component of the open area rule is that, or a significant source of the problem with open areas is when you have trespassing vehicles. You have trespassing vehicle traffic over the area, and so that's also specifically addressed in the rule. First of all, if you have that occur on your property and it results in disturbed surface area, so area that is no longer stabilized, you're under an obligation to bring it back into a stabilized state. And then you're also required to take action to try to prevent those intrusions from occurring in the future. And you have a couple of options. One is to install some kind of physical barrier, and the other is to post no trespassing signs that conform to whatever applicable state or federal laws apply to your property. And then finally, there's the requirement, which is specified in a separate rule in subsection E, to clean up track out when it occurs.
Before we move
Right.
on from open areas, it looks like we have a question from Johnny.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
You
Yes.
should be able to unmute yourself, Johnny. If not, I'll take a crack at it. Yeah, go for it.
Yep. So I'm probably gonna have quite a few questions going through this. For the visible emission limitations, is that going to be on the owner and operator to perform those VEs, or is that if an inspector is down in Yuma, they'll perform the VE?
That'll be, again, yeah,
and if
that's
it's
a good.
up to, yeah, because if it's up to the owner operator with the methods that you guys suggested, I just wasn't sure if the option to do the box digital opacity would be option, or if that's what you as an inspector are going to be using.
So no, in this rule, as we have drafted it and are proposing it, we do not impose any monitoring obligations on the subject property. So everything in here in terms of determining compliance would be performed by an inspector, including the visible emissions observations. That is not going to be the case for the construction rule, but because that's not how other rules that EPA has approved function. But for that is something that's been approved for other open area type rules, and so we took that approach as well. That there's no periodic monitoring obligation on the part of owners of lands or.
Will it be for like CAS? We do have a permit as of monitoring requirements. Would this be included in permit renewals or permit updates to do this monitoring, since it's already a requirement that we monitor us?
So you have permitted facilities that you think would include open areas that might be subject to this rule? If you have,
don't have my permit in front of me, but I believe my permit has facility-wide fugitive rule.
All right, so if you've got a permitted source, that might actually be something else we need an exemption for. We'll have to think about that from this rule. But generally, if you've got opacity limits that apply to something at a permitted source, this is not going to take those away. And you have monitoring obligations, you will still have those monitoring obligations. But if all you've got is an open area, I mean, normally just an open area is not permitted. right? So all you have is an open area, a vacant lot, then you're not going to be obligated by this rule to go out and conduct periodic opacity observations.
Okay. And in terms of those, where are my notes? The stabilization methods, that's only gonna be if there's a complaint and you guys are called out that it
No,
starts,
that's
or
the way the rule is written, is that is an obligation on the part of every open area owner to make sure that uh, their, their lot is stabilized. So if we come out and, inspector sees that there are visible emissions coming from a lot, doesn't matter if there's been a complaint or there hasn't been traffic over it, that would still be considered a violation.
so would it be up to the owner of an open area that's disturbed to call you? Since you said the test methods would be done by an inspector?
No, there's no obligation to call us, but they should. Uh, I mean, in order to avoid having an inspector come out and seeing it, they should maintain stabilization on their property. But no, there's no self-reporting obligation in the rule either.
There are a couple more hands.
I saw Harold, I think, and Pamela.
Assuming the order that I'm seeing them is the order that they were raised, I think Pam is next. Pam, you should be able to unmute.
Can everyone hear me okay?
I
Yep,
think you're a
just
little
fine.
bit short, but we can hear you, yes.
Beautiful, thank you so much. Yeah, just a couple of questions kind of to follow up on the last question. I believe for like in Maricopa County, it kind of works so that we don't need a separate like dust control permit for open areas so long as they're adjacent
Correct.
to a facility that has a Title V, they kind of get wrapped into that. So like to your point earlier, that might be a good point of clarification to add. And then a second quick question
Mhm.
on the visible like emissions limitations. Is
Yes,
there an opacity that you had in mind for that for crossing the boundary line, or is it just like anything?
it's anything. It's 0% opacity, but there's a time exception to it that we'll see in the. We can go to that now, actually, since we're talking about it. There's no reason to rigidly go from one to the next. Um, so this is actually how it works. It's the standard is met if the opacity of emissions doesn't exceed 0% because it's any visible emissions for an aggregate period of more than 3 minutes in any 60-minute period. But again, it's visible emissions across the property line. Simply having visible emissions, being generated within a large property, if they're not actually crossing the property line, then that's not a violation.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then
Mhm.
I'm sorry, one more question. I had a debate with someone else within our organization today about open area and what exactly a structure means. So we
Okay.
have some solar sites, right? And it's a big, what some people would call a big open area, but you've got all of your solar panels and you know, they're on posts that, that's how they're constructed.
Mm-hmm.
So would the solar panels and the posts and all of that infrastructure count as a structure, or are you looking at structure as more like an actual building?
No, I think a structure is a broader term. I mean, I think the normal understanding of it, the dictionary definition would, in the absence of specific language to the contrary or some kind of, uh, domain specific definition that might apply, I think we'd apply the dictionary definition. I believe that would include solar, on-the-ground solar panels.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That's super helpful.
Uh-huh. Sure. And we have one more. Is that Harold? Harold, did you want to go ahead?
You should be able to unmute now, Harold.
Like maybe we should just move ahead, and Harold, if you're able to unmute, just interrupt me, and we'll get to your question. He's not, let's see. And there's nothing popping up in the written question area. 5307. No, okay.
It looks like his microphone is disabled. Harold, if you can just click your attendee button with your name on the panel of names, it should allow you to enable your microphone. I can try to do it on my end too. I just don't know if that'll work.
Okay, well, I'm sorry you're having trouble, Harold. We'll move ahead, and again, feel free to just go ahead and interrupt me whenever you get your technical difficulty sorted out. So the next sector or type of area that is regulated under the rule is unpaved traffic areas. Let's go ahead and take a look at the definition for that. So that is any unpaved non-road area that is used by or with the consent of the owner. So trespass would not be considered, a valid unpaved traffic area. For parking, maneuvering, material handling, storing motor vehicles and equipment, and it includes unpaved parking lots, equipment staging areas, automobile impound yards, wrecking yards, automobile dismantling yards, salvage yards, material handling, and storage. So, a lot of these types of activities with vehicles or equipment that often occur on an area that is unpaved would be subject to this rule. There is a limitation. This only applies, first of all, to an area that is located at an industrial, commercial, or institutional site. So this does not apply to residential unpaved traffic areas. And it only applies if it was newly constructed or modified after the effective date of this rule, which again, we anticipate will be late summer or fall of 2026. And then also only if the area is greater than or equal to 1 acre in size. And if you're curious about where all these limitations came from, this is basically, I mentioned earlier that we do modeling to try to demonstrate that the control strategy will achieve attainment. And when you do modeling, you make a lot of assumptions about the level of controls that you put into the model, and then that affects the level of emissions and the resulting concentrations. And so for the most part, these limitations like the 1 acre in size and only commercial, industrial, et cetera, is based on our ability to include those limitations and still model attainment. So we're trying to make the rules as limited in scope as possible. We don't ever want to regulate just for the sake of regulation. And so when we can include limitations and still achieve our air quality goals for a rule, then we'll do that. Obviously, you also have to consider, trade-offs between limiting the rule for one sector or another sector, that kind of thing. But in general, we had discussions about like these limitations. Do we include it? Do we not? But always determined, well, we can model attainment with that limitation, then we should include it. Requirements for unpaved traffic areas. First of all, they're fairly simple. This is another one that has this no visible emissions beyond the property line standard that applies, and then also has some control requirements that apply. Basically, the requirement is to put some kind of cover on the area that will prevent fugitive dust emissions. So pavement obviously will do the job. Clean gravel to a depth of 2 inches, or if you can't do either of those, then you're allowed to use dust suppressants, but those require periodic reapplication, obviously. And then like open areas, there's these track out cleanup requirement for unpaved traffic areas. So I'm not seeing.
Johnny, did you have another question?
Yeah, for going back, you don't have to scroll back. The open areas, there are quite a few areas, at least on MCAS Yuma, and I don't know if there's anywhere else within Yuma County or in the PM-10 area that could be considered a disturbed open area, that are CERCLA sites. So it makes it hard to, we'd have to work with other entities in terms of if stabilization becomes a requirement for that. I just
Okay.
wasn't sure if you've taken into account those CERCLA Superfund sites.
No, that was not something that was on our radar, but we'll take a look at that. That may be, I don't know if we'll need another exemption for that or if there's some other way of addressing that. But yeah, thanks for bringing that to our attention. Okay. All right. So we talked internally about perhaps having a break at some point. This would probably be a good time if we want one. So I guess I'm going to go ahead and just suggest we go ahead and take a 10-minute break. And so we will be back at 4:15 and finish up the rule. Right. Pam likes the break. Good. All right. See you in a few minutes, everybody.
Hey Harold, whatever you did, it looks
Can you
like it
hear me?
worked. Yes. So whenever we get back from
Hallelujah.
break, we can begin with your question once everyone's back. Thanks a lot.
Okay. I'll go ahead and send it to you. I was typing it in, so then you can kind of look at it.
Sure. Thanks.
But I saw that Zach is on. He'll be happy to know I did some stretching during during the break.
Likewise, after an hour 15, I certainly needed it.
Yeah.
So Harold should have audio now.
Okay, good.
And
Can you hear me?
We
yes.
can. We
Oh,
can.
amazing.
All right. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started again. And Harold, we'll start with your question.
Question I had, when we were talking about open areas, you said 1,000 square feet.
Yes.
You know, that might be a little concerning, you know, because you're really only talking roughly an area about 32 foot by 32 foot. And if you drive around Yuma, there are a lot of yards that either they've abandoned their irrigation in their property because they didn't want to pay the price of water, or
Hmm.
maybe they never landscaped it in the first place. And so what we'd be doing is rolling a whole lot of homeowners under this umbrella. And I guess who's going to be responsible for policing something like that? You know, I mean, I guess if I was looking at it, I would have said probably the size of a, you know, standard lot, 80 by 100 or 100 by 100. So you're talking about 8,000, 10,000 feet, something like that. 1,000 feet's awful small, guys.
Well, it has to be 1,000 feet of disturbed surface area within, if it's an urban area, a tenth of an acre.
Okay. I just
So,
I just see there's going to be some real issues coming around there with who's policing because there's you can drive by on the freeway up there by every road, look in the backyard of all those homes. A big chunk of them have no development at all in their backyard. As a matter of fact, they park their RVs there. You can drive around Yuma, and you can see, especially in some of the areas where people are struggling to survive, they've cut the water off for water in your yard. And
mm,
so I'm just saying, when you're going to be rolling a whole bunch of people in, you may not be want to rolling in under that thing at 1,000 feet. And I didn't know where that 1,000 feet came. For ag, it's nothing. Okay, but I was just thinking about Yuma County in particular
mhm.
and the impact on its citizens, and it could have a significant impact. But if that's what it has to be, that's what it has to be.
Okay. Well, I thought we did talk about that internally at some point. I thought we had come to the conclusion that it wouldn't have that wide of an effect, but we can revisit that.
I
There are a
just
couple.
just an
Oh, I'm sorry.
observation made. I mean, I was, it's pretty small.
So your question, Harold, about who would be policing, who would be enforcing this rule is its own concern. As far as applicability to individual residential lots, there are a couple of different things going on. So as Steve was describing, that 1,000 square foot threshold is for the area of disturbance.
Right.
So unless 1,000 square feet of area is disturbed at a time, um, the I don't mean that the disturbance occurs all at once, but I mean, at any given point, if you have more than 1,000 square feet of disturbance present on the same lot, that's when the rule applies. That's a substantial amount of disturbance, unless an entire yard is being disturbed. If it's just like a line in and out, a makeshift driveway, effectively, where someone's parking in their yard and they're not driving all over the yard. Hopefully, that's not going to add up to 1,000 square feet. But also, if we're talking about an area which is intentionally used for vehicle travel, then we're talking about not the open area rule applying to that surface, but the subsequent provisions that we just spoke about regarding unpaved vehicle travel areas. That would apply instead. But if we're talking about open areas,
Adam, but I'm just saying, a standard lot's 80 feet. You take 30 feet wide, whatever deep. You take 30 feet off for the driveway, let's say. That leaves you 50 feet. You're only talking about an area in the front yard of 50 by 20. If they have not done anything for landscaping, it is a disturbed area. People will be on it and everything else. I mean, that's, it sounds, when you say 1,000 feet, people go, oh, it's a lot. But when you really look at it, it's not.
Depending on what the lot's used for, yes, it could be that the whole thing is disturbed. That is possible.
Standard housing lot is 80 by 100. That's 8,000 square feet. So that's, when you take that all, put a 2,000 square foot house on top of that, that leaves about 6,000 feet out there for drives, sidewalks, and yard. And if they aren't doing anything with the yard, you'll be over your 1,000-foot threshold.
Yeah, that's true.
I just wanted to put it out there. It's not, I mean, I like to have things that people can. We don't need to hire 500 people to run around Yuma checking, just making sure everyone's watering the ground in their yard.
If you can think of anyone who might be an expert on this topic, it would be extremely helpful if you could share their contact information with us. If you can't think of anyone, that's fine. But if anyone comes to mind, it'd be great to get to know.
I talk to planning and zoning. I mean, I just, as a third party on this conversation, just standing there looking at it and going, okay, I can see where this could be a problem. And maybe it's not a problem, but it'd be worth asking planning and zoning.
I mean, a lot of these areas are enclosed, right? I mean, I'm thinking of like my backyard, and my backyard's pretty big, and I think, and I've never actually done anything with the landscaping. So, but on the other hand, it's enclosed by a wall. I don't, you never see like dust blowing from my yard to the out onto the street. So I wonder if that's a possible avenue to exempt.
Well, the fence would exempt you in your back. You're right, because you do have a windbreak there. So maybe what's going to happen is the city and the county are going to have to require landscaping in the front yards. Again, I'm just thinking, guys. So anyway, that's all I had. You got other stuff to talk about besides some guy not taking care of his front yard.
Okay. All right. Well, that's something we'll have to revisit before the next stakeholder meeting. Any other questions? I don't see any. Okay. All right. So the next element of the rule is a requirement for track out cleanup. And essentially, the requirement is within 24 hours after discovery that track out has occurred from either an open area that's subject to subsection C or an unpaved traffic area subject to subsection D has been deposited on a paved road. The owner or operator of the open area is supposed to clean up the track out. So we provide a number of options for doing that. We had one early comment questioning whether we really needed to specify options at all. It is a feature of all the other rules that we've looked at. We're a little concerned that if there's nothing specified, EPA may have some questions about it. So I think we're probably going to keep that in there, but we're open to comments on that. Any questions on that? All right, good. All right, so then we have our rule for unpaved roads. Applicability is a little complicated here because we do want to have, a threshold. We don't want this requirement applying to all roads. That wouldn't be consistent with the modeling. And so the normal type of threshold that you apply to roads is average daily trips, how many vehicle trips occur on the road. But then the question becomes, how do you know? So the approach that we're taking is that if the owner or operator already has existing reliable information showing that they're over the average daily trips of 150, then that road is subject to the rule. If the owner operator doesn't have any information, then they don't become subject to the rule until ADEQ requests a trip count, which we're authorized to do under subsection 2, and that trip count shows that they're over 150 average daily trips. And then once that occurs, then they do become subject to the rule. Here, consistent with other rules and other programs, rather than the visible dust crossing the property line standard, we are proposing to impose a limit of 20% opacity. And then we have a deadline of December 31, 2026 to implement the actual control measures, since especially pavement is a more extensive type of control and expensive type of control. We wanted to give the maximum amount of time that we could to comply with this particular requirement, so we're given until the end of 2026. Again, so the controls can be in place and implemented by 2027. But the options are to install pavement, again, clean gravel to a depth of 2 inches, dust suppressants, and then there is a prohibition against any new unpaved public roads after the effective date of this section. So again, no new public unpaved roads after the section goes into effect. Yes, Johnny.
I was speaking to someone, so I wasn't sure if it was brought up about the average daily trips. Did anyone raise a question for that? Just so I'm not
No,
repeating.
I tried to give an
Okay,
explanation.
so I might have missed it. So one of my questions was, since last year the requirements were for average annual daily trips, and you've changed it to average daily trips, but you did not make that notate that in the new draft tables. So for like unpaved roads, public unpaved roads, it's 150 ADT. Previous, it was still on the average annual daily trips. And
I see.
same thing, it looks like on the draft rules, it says for the paved roads, I just want to make sure I'm not misspeaking. It's 5,000 weekday average daily trips, so that's still that ADT. In the draft tables for the paved roads, you still have it at AADT, average annual daily trips is what I'm getting that AADT means.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I just want to make sure that distinction is notated, as those are two very different calculations.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So I guess one thing just occurring to me, how would you know the annual average daily trips unless you had like a traffic counter continuously on site?
So for like MCAS, I had back when in 2024, when I was working with a lot of you guys on the rules that you were trying to implement on like the BMGR and treating us as like a vacant lot, an open area, and all this stuff, we sent you a bunch of documentation. And what we did for a rough count is for the public area that's available for public recreation and off-roading, it's done by permits. And they had like 8,000 permits issued in 2023, and we just kind of based it off of that, based off of check-ins. So they have to check in every time that they enter like that area, and so that's how we roughly provided data for you in terms of average annual daily trips for the public recreational area. And you guys never came back with any questions or indicating our method that we provided was incorrect.
Okay, but that's for a particular area. Like, how would you do that for um, just
Oh,
and all?
I'm not, yeah, I'm not saying the difference between them, like you should use one over the other. I just want to make
Okay.
sure that that distinction is made, that that change has been made, in case
Okay.
people are thinking it was just like a fat finger, a mistype.
No.
Because that was in 2024, you were referring to everything using the average annual daily. And I don't think anyone questioned it in 2024.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't know how annual would work. I mean, in this case, you do a trip count. We have a method there's a kind of a,
And if the method was changed, that's fine. I'm just saying back in 2024 when we were talking about this originally. And
yeah,
so if the method has changed due to you guys' reconsidering, totally good. It just wasn't dictated in your draft control package where you had things highlighted and crossed out and made red
I
for the
see.
changes.
I see. Okay.
That's a great point. It is possible that it would be appropriate to use different notions of um, trip counting for paved versus unpaved roads in order to make counting more convenient depending on the context where it's required, but it may be appropriate to make sure that they're consistent across the board. We can look into that. Josh has raised a hand and may have a related comment. Um, Josh, you should be able to unmute.
Yeah, to Johnny's point there, it's an important distinction, and in Yuma especially, where our seasonal traffic changes pretty drastically from summer to winter. The average annual daily traffic, I think, is really what you want. And how that gets calculated, Steve, is you measure it, the daily traffic at a particular amount, at a particular point in time, and then the traffic engineers will apply a seasonal adjustment factor. And those are published tables from the Institute of Traffic Engineers that are pretty standard.
All right. Okay.
And as long as we're confident that those seasonal profiles are consistent across different road types,
Well,
you
and
might be able to
there's
write
tables of
something like that.
those. There's tables
Sorry,
of
go
those factors depending on the road types and paved, unpaved, that sort of thing. I think what I'm getting at is if you came to us in August and asked us to measure the daily traffic, you're going to get a drastically different number than if you did in February.
Okay.
So if you ask us to measure it in August, it's going to come back below your 150, and we're going to say we don't need to treat it. When the other 6 months of the year, you might have 300 cars a day going down.
Understood.
Okay. It makes sense. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, we'll look into that. I'm not sure. It may be that it was just a difference. We were using, as I indicated, some exemplars from other jurisdictions. Maybe this was carried over from that, and I just didn't notice the discrepancy between that and the assumptions we were making in the modeling. So, or in our, other documents relating to what the control measures were. So, yeah, it sounds like maybe we do need to do annual, but we'll take a look at that.
Real quick, while we're on the subject, Josh, would you feel confident that those seasonal adjustment factors are reasonably similar on unpaved public roads to what the profile looks like annually on busier paved public roads?
It's going to be a different factor, but again, you use those ITE tables to make that decision. And so most likely for Yuma County, if we were requested to provide a count to ADEQ, we would contract with the local MPO to go out and do the count, and they would apply those factors and give us the average annual daily traffic.
Okay.
Great. Thanks.
Right. So we're at paved public roads now. And this rule actually applies to paved public roads and unpaved shoulders on paved public collector and arterial roads. That was terminology that we came up with internally to try to make sure that we weren't pulling in too many small streets, small local streets, and that we were that would have been inconsistent with the modeling that Adam did. But obviously, we're open to comments on that terminology. Again, the same visible emissions limitation of 20%. There is, in terms of the controls that are required, first of all, there's a street sweeping requirement. So, and there's different schedules depending on the traffic on the road. And again, obviously, we'll need to revisit whether it's average daily trips or annual average daily trips. But if it's greater than 5,000, sweeping once every 2 weeks. If it's less than 5,000, at least once every 2 months. And then if you're subject to the every 2 week schedule because you're over 5,000, there's also a requirement that the sweeping be conducted by PM-10 certified street sweepers. We've already had a comment on that, so that's an issue that we'll have to be visiting in terms of whether that is feasible, whether there's anything that can be done to make it feasible. But that is something that's already been brought into question. And then for unpaved shoulders, the requirement is either to pave the shoulder. Again, kind of similar for the unpaved roads and the unpaved traffic areas, paved, gravel, or dust suppressants. And then H, as I mentioned earlier, specifies the compliance determination methods. So again, these are not required to be applied by the regulated entity. They would be applied by inspectors. That being said, obviously it's in your interest, at least if you see visible emissions crossing your property line, do something about it. If it looks like your area is disturbed, try to stabilize it, so you don't have an inspector come in and point out for you that there's a problem. There's, as I mentioned earlier, for the crossing the property line standards, there's a special EPA reference method that you apply when there's this time exception, as we have in the crossing the property line standard. So you're allowed 3 minutes out of an hour. There's a specific methodology for doing opacity observations for those types of standards. And again, as we went over earlier, it's 0%, but for an aggregate period no more than 3 minutes in a 60-minute period. And then Maricopa County has a method for determining the opacity of emissions from unpaved roads, and we would be following that. And that's, again, something that's been approved by EPA. In fact, for the most of the compliance methods, we are just following what Maricopa County has in its existing Appendix C to its rules. We'll have to develop a state appendix that basically mirrors those requirements when we go to the notice of proposed rulemaking. But for the moment, we're just providing a kind of a crosswalk between our rules and the Maricopa County rules in terms of what's required. And that's all explained in the footnotes. And then finally, record keeping. There is a basic requirement that you create and retain records that provide evidence that you complied with the rule, that you employed the control measures that are required. The department may develop forms to try to assist people in keeping records that are subject to the rule. And if the rule provides that if you use a department form that's provided for the purpose and you keep complete and accurate records on that form, then that will be deemed to be compliance with this provision. And there's also a requirement that you have to provide your records within 48 hours after a request from the department, and retain them for at least 3 years. And that is the end of the rule. Are there any other questions or concerns that you'd like us? Yes, Pamela.
Hello again.
Hi.
Something I noticed that I've seen, like back in the day on other rulemakings, it's been brought up. Would you be willing to consider 2 business days instead of 48 hours? Because then you don't have to get into excluding weekends and what about state holidays. And so I know other rulemakings have done business days instead, but just a thought.
No, that's a good point. My guess is we probably can live with that, but we'll certainly take a look at it.
Thanks. That's all.
Okay. Yes, Johnny. And I see there's
so I
some.
wanted to, yes.
No, go ahead, Johnny. I'm sorry.
Okay, I just wanted to maybe verify and get additional clarification for the military training exemptions.
Sure. We can go back up to that.
So military training activities conducted, which is the tactical training, maintenance, repair, removal of targets, munitions associated. It includes open areas on active military ranges, which include designated impact area, landing zones, and bivouac areas. So in
Right.
terms of the exemptions for open areas on active military ranges, is that only for the open areas on our range BMGR that are undisturbed? Or is it if it becomes disturbed, the open area on our range, do we then have to abide by the open areas rules, or are we still exempt as an open area?
No, the exemption is for, you don't have to stabilize these areas. So if they're
Okay.
disturbed, it's exempt. I'm guessing
Okay.
because it's very hard to keep an area where like ammunition is landing or shells are landing
Yeah.
or you're, going bivouacking and going in and out and that kind of thing. And I know nothing about the military, but even I can imagine that it would be difficult to keep an area like that stabilized, or probably near to impossible.
It's worth noting that the way the draft exemption language is written, open areas would be exempt from that stabilization requirement if the disturbance on those areas was a consequence of one of the listed types of
Right.
training activity. So if it was disturbed
Okay.
for some other reason, the exemption would not apply as written.
Okay. In that regard, Border Patrol and those entities tend to use the range as well, and if they deem it necessary to drive wherever, they drive wherever. Is that considered emergency? Since it's not, but it's not us. But we also can't restrict them. It rarely
I don't
happens,
think
as
that,
far as I'm aware. We have a lot of rules and agreements in place, but it could potentially happen.
I don't think it's necessarily an emergency, but it could qualify as one under the exemption. I mean, it depends on what they're doing, why they're doing it. Um, but it would have to be to prevent public injury or restore, obviously this wouldn't be for the Border Patrol, restore critical utilities. So the way it's written, it would have to be to prevent public injury.
Okay. And
But I'm not
then
sure if you know
someone
what
else.
kind of activities the Border Patrol,
Yeah.
I guess would the concern be that they would disturb your areas and then you're on the hook
Yeah.
for, okay, all right.
Yeah.
The way the
I do
draft
know.
definition, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I do know MCAS and our facilities, we have, a lot of potential agreements, and we have like our natural resources manuals and all this stuff where we try to work with, Border Patrol and everything in terms of staying on the roads. But I also know it's not always feasible to get them to do that.
Okay.
The
Well, let's see, that would be a, let's look at unpaved traffic areas.
If the vehicle use is authorized, like if
Right,
y'all
right.
expect them to do that and intend to allow them to, yeah, then that would fall under the unpaved traffic area provision rather than open areas. That said,
Right.
so regarding the emergency exemption, that applies equally to both of those provisions. Since we were discussing it, the way that the draft definition of emergency and emergency activity is currently written. It only really applies to responses to unforeseen natural events and acts of God. So unless Border Patrol was responding to something basically weather related, it would be unlikely that that exemption would apply.
Okay. I think I'm good for right now. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Pam, you had another question? No? Um, all right, I'm not seeing any other written questions or hands raised, so.
Oh, shoot. Sorry. Can you
Oh,
hear
it's
me?
okay. Yeah.
Sorry, yes, one more on unpaved roads,
Yes.
section F. Okay. Firstly, thank you for the emergency exemption for having to deal with emergencies on utility corridors. Coming from APS, big fan of that one and very much appreciate it. But in terms of unpaved roads, so we're thinking about like our big transmission right of ways. And, we sort of know anecdotally we don't have 150 or more trips per day along those corridors. But trying to figure out it would be it would be burdensome to have to do the trip monitoring to prove it. But then you've got the 1A, the existing reliable information. Could
Right.
that be something along the lines of the number of work orders per month or something like that that could be used as documentation?
Yeah,
Just
but
trying to get an idea about, wrapping my head around that one.
right. I mean, sure, I think that that could be existing reliable information, but I think the more important point is that um, if you don't already have information that indicates that you're above 120, then you're not under any obligation to do anything. And we would have to come in and ask you to do a trip count for you to, uh, verify that. And under the circumstances you're describing, if you had like good evidence already indicating that you're not above 120, that you're below it, then, I think if we made the request, we would withdraw it. So, but you're not under an obligation um, to demonstrate the negative. We have to either show that you have information that, yeah, you're above 120. Like we wanted to come in and say, hey, you're not controlling this clearly very heavily trafficked road. It would be our obligation to show that you had information ahead of time and should have known. Or if we saw that what we thought was a heavily trafficked road, we'd have to come in and ask you to do a trip count first. And then if the trip count showed you were about 120, then your obligation to control would only then take effect, and you'd only, potentially be in violation if after that point you fail to comply with the rule.
Okay, got it. So in that case, if there was inspector came out, thought that we might have more than the 150 average daily trips, then we would have the 60 days to basically complete that
Yes,
trip count
correct,
and submit it. Okay, that
correct.
makes sense. Thank you.
Sure. All right, I think we'll go on to the final part of this meeting. Good news, you don't have to listen to me anymore. Lexi's going to go over the next steps for the stakeholder and rulemaking process.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. And thank you all for staying, hanging on this afternoon with us. I just wanted to go over what our next steps look like for this. The first thing being that we do have a second stakeholder meeting for this specific portion of the draft rule language, and a reminder will be sent out via email to those who received the original invitation. This second meeting will be held on August 26th at 9 a.m. And then as far as the meetings we'll host for the other two rules, the construction and agriculture rule, as Steve mentioned, we will be having 2 meetings for both of those as well. They'll be announced as soon as the details are finalized. And after we receive feedback on all 3 rules, so the open area rule, the construction rule, and the agriculture rule, we will formally propose the rules through a notice of proposed rulemaking. And at that point, there will be a public comment period where you can leave feedback. However, we wanted to encourage you to provide as much feedback as possible now, because once the rule is formally proposed, we have less flexibility to make substantial changes without reproposing the rule and restarting the public comment process. And then I just wanted to drop a link in the chat for you to register to receive these emails if you didn't receive the invite and you were forwarded the invite. This is an easy way for you to register to be notified of all of our stakeholder meetings that are upcoming. And again, there will be a second invite to the second meeting for this draft rule language going out in the next couple of weeks. So I'm just going to drop this in the chat, and you put in your email, your name, and decide what you want to subscribe to. Great. I think that was all that I had. Adam or Steve, did you want to add anything else regarding next steps?
Hopefully folks can see the chat. Next to the button you click on to get to the questions window, there's another button with 2 overlapping speech bubbles, hopefully, that you can see that link that Lexi just provided. If not, or if you miss it, or if you have any feedback that you'd like to provide on the draft rule, please email airplanning, all one word. That's airplanning@azdeq.gov. Thanks.
And I just want to thank everyone for, attending today's meeting. I appreciate the questions, comments. I think we will take those comments and look at it and reevaluate and see if there's any change that we need to make. So appreciate you all attending this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.